Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. Welcome back, everybody, to the Flatiron Syndicate Podcast. For episode 164 today, we are gathered here with Brian from iWire, who I'm sure you know, and then we've got Jeremy, who's now a friend of the podcast, a familiar face. And Brian, we kind of had a little talkings in the background, but as soon as we had the podcast a couple of weeks ago where we talked about your announcement that you were stopping doing the harness merges,
Yeah.
we knew that eventually we were going to have to sit down and chat about well, what's going on? So what's going on with that? And that's where I want to start. But we definitely want to get to what the future is. But maybe first, let's talk about how did this come to be? What happened?
Yeah. So I think kind of going back to the beginning is actually the important part here. For anybody who doesn't know, which I'd be surprised, but you never know. iWire became what it is now as a byproduct of a service that we provide or provided at this point of conversation. We have a few left. We're doing those, but basically new engine, old Subaru. That's what we became known for. That's what built this business. And as we've grown, we've expanded into other things. And eventually we got to a point where we had to look at the service business that we've been providing for 16 years now. I've been doing for
Wow.
20 and go, is this feasible to continue given all the other stuff that we now do? So one of the things I was thinking about when we were kind of doing this whole thing is before I started iWire and when I was working for another company where we did the swaps, there was a point where we did mail order harness merging. But given all the stuff that was going on in-house, I remember distinctly saying mail order harnesses will never work.
Hmm.
And then yet we built a business entirely around mail order harnesses.
Right.
So for a time. So that's what built this business. And the hardest part about this was that we knew that because it was built with the people that were involved that we did these swaps for, they're our most vocal, ardent supporters.
Hmm.
And so to say we're no longer providing this service was a huge fear because this is how we are able to do all of the other things that we do now is because of the people that supported us in the beginning. And the last thing you want to do is alienate any of those people because the only reason we exist is because of them. So it really became a head versus heart kind of situation. So probably the two biggest variables are what everybody wants to go to is the emissions and EPA, which is certainly a part of it and a sizable part of it, but it's also, being sort of upfront as we can in terms of a business perspective, it's a relatively small part of the business these days. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that. But if you look at our web store and look at how many things that we have for sale now, that's really where it goes. And what we realize is we can help a lot more people in that than we can by just doing this other component, the service work. And now we don't take away from the fact that that service work that we did for the merges is such a critical component to the project as a whole. We don't discount that.
Sure.
But there just comes a math equation at some point that when we started looking at it just to be able to do what we think we can do, which we'll talk about later, and already have proven that we've done up to this point,
Hmm.
there just is you just have to decide that we can't do it. But what we didn't want to do was just shut it off and have a situation where nobody could get back in if they were in the middle of a project.
Right.
So what we did, which was the part that was probably the craziest and we did not expect to the level that what happened is
Hmm.
that we posted it in the morning, and by the afternoon, the 25 slots that we had booked were completely gone, plus a gigantic wait list behind it.
Whoa.
That support was something I did not expect. We were like, okay, we'll probably book this out maybe by the end of the week, end of next week. And the flood that we got was
Hmm.
just shocking, honestly. of people. And then it became a real challenge because it went from, okay, we've got all these people on board, and now we're having to say no to people. And that reality was really difficult, sitting
Yeah.
there having to do that, because that's not what I want. Our job is to make projects come alive. And us saying no is, it breaks my heart as much as
Yeah.
the person I'm saying no to.
Sure.
But I think the thing, and we talked about this a little bit, that was maybe even more surprising than the volume, is we didn't know how people would react generally. Um, and the support that everyone showed, in encouraging us, and that, yeah, of course, that they're bummed that we're not doing this thing anymore, but excited for what's next, was really encouraging. So I just really want to say thank you to everybody that helped get us here and continues to support us despite us not doing that one thing anymore.
Yeah. One of the things I got to say that it, I mean, obviously you're in the middle of it, and I've been aware of it through the years that I've been here at Flatirons, which
Yes.
is like you would think if you're in a shop that modifies cars, like that's just it. Like you once you get established, like you're just going to keep on doing what you're doing, and
Yeah.
there's no little forks in the road or hiccups. Like once you figure it out, it just keeps on going. And one of the things that I've been surprised by as long as I've been here is how many times you have to pivot because things change. And right now we're in probably one of the larger ones that I've seen, but we there have been significant changes in the aftermarket industry. I don't know, probably every 3 to 5 years, where like all
Yeah.
of a sudden, like one thing that is kind of like your standard like business line, all of a sudden, like, well, now that changes, it goes away, you have to switch to something else, and then switch to something else.
Well,
And
I mean,
Yeah.
technology changes.
Yeah.
What people do in the market changes. There's only so many first gen Impreza coupes out there that people
Right.
are.
yeah,
Right.
So they keep coming out of the woodwork. A friend of mine just asked me today, "Hey, can you help me swap this?" Like,
Yeah. 100%. I think that to that point, we've been in the middle of it forever. And every time a friend of mine goes, "Have you run out of these things to swap yet?" And I keep going, "No."
nope, yeah,
No, it keeps coming. But sort of to the second piece of this, which is, a forward progress component, and this is sort of the EPA car emissions kind of conversation, which is driving most of the change we're talking about here, is that, um, we tried on, and I think we talked about this on the last time I was on here, maybe one of the other ones, with my blue RS.
oh yeah, hmm
And at some point it had a six cylinder in it. With a standalone ECU, obviously not going to pass emissions, standalone ECU. So we pulled that and we put an '08 STI platform in it. And at that point, we're like, okay, maybe we can get this through California Bar. I know you guys talked about it a little bit
hmm
last time. Just for reference, it's a process to get an engine swap legal in the state of California. And there are certain requirements. And basically, we ran into a issue that we were not going to get around. And the only way to get around it would be to prove to them that the things that we did are legal. And that means a CARB EO, which is what Cobb is spending lots of time and money on these days.
yeah,
And the reality is, just quick and dirty pricing for something like that, so people have a reference. Depending on what you're trying to do, you have to show them, that you have to show them what it is you're getting the CARBO for. So when we're doing an engine swap, what are we getting the CARBO for? Are we getting it for the emissions components? Are we getting it for the swap itself? Are we getting it for this? Are we getting it for that? And there's not a distinct roadmap for that. So
hmm
you kind of have to show them and make it yourself and prove it. It's all on you. And the reality was, to get just my car through the bar process or CARB process with my exact swap, and it would effectively not worked on any other car, was probably going to be about $15,000.
wow,
And so every time you want to swap a CAN bus equipped engine into a non CAN bus equipped car, so basically an '08 plus STI into anything older, you are to get it through California Bar, you're looking at $15,000 to just do that process. And there's no guarantees there either.
right,
And so we just got to the point where this is no longer feasible for forward progress. So to the point of running out of cars and running out of parts, that
Yeah.
becomes part of the equation. So yeah, of course we can keep building them and finding them, but they're getting older every day, and yet they're still the same price. You
Yeah.
know, when I first started doing this in 2005, you could get an O or oh 04. You can get an oh 04, oh 05 STI engine for $5,000 with 10,000 miles on it. In
Yeah.
2024, they're still $5,000.
But they've got like
Right?
150,000 miles
With
on it.
at least 150,000
Yeah.
miles on it.
Yeah.
So we wanted to move that side of the business forward, ran into effectively a roadblock, and went, okay, well, what can we do here? And the options became very limited.
Hmm.
Because as anybody who's in business knows, you can't just sit here and, do what we've been doing forever. It just doesn't work.
Well, one of
Um,
the
yeah,
other part of that too, with the difficulty of getting it to the point where in California you can do the swap and get it certified, is that like here in Colorado, we're starting to have the California standards. So like, and probably it's a bit of a flip of the coin, but there's a reasonable chance that other states are going to start having the same thing. So the market where you can actually do this without like a CARB approval or something like that is
is
potentially going
well,
to get smaller.
and the challenge you guys noted this last time is that you're 100% right. We're seeing more and more states because we see them all. More
Hmm.
and more states. Utah's another prime example of this. On a Utah state that you kind of wouldn't expect, and we see it more and more across the country that states are implementing some level of inspection that they didn't before. The
Yeah.
problem is places like Colorado and Utah don't have a process
Yeah.
like California to get it legal. So you can run into an impasse because, and I've had some customers and friends in Utah that have run in this exact thing because it's run by the health department. And
Hmm.
so there's no process that says here's how you do it, or and go, these are the rules I need to follow to make it happen. And by the way, even in California, technically it's a guideline. It's not
Right.
rule. But yet they treat it like rules. That's a different story. But those kinds of problems are going to affect more and more states as we go. That is not changing. It's just the reality of it. And the challenge is that the response that we get a lot of times is, well, I live in somewhere that it doesn't matter. And you're 100% right. And it isn't enforcement on the personal local level. It's enforcement at the higher end levels of businesses because you have to look at the EPA and go, where are they going to get their most impact for the least amount? It's going to be coming after somebody that is selling a lot of these things.
Yeah. The business that's
And
doing
so
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's not it as a end consumer, you're fine. Like you don't have to worry about anything. And I get that. I totally respect it. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later because I think generally speaking, the trend in the industry talking about change is products are so much better. The DIY is so much more achievable at such a higher level. And as a byproduct of that, it allows for consumers to do things on their own, provided they can get their hands on it. So that
Are you thinking like are you thinking standalones here or
this
actual merges?
yeah, so I wanted to kind of pick at that a little bit.
Yeah.
I had a slight issue with it. I'll
Okay.
leave it that.
Yeah.
Because I think standalones absolutely have their place. Standalones, because we cannot build race cars with access ports anymore. That was a lovely time. We wish we all could go back.
Yeah.
It does mean that the threshold for
I
standalone
don't.
is lower. What
Yeah.
do you say? Sorry, what did you
I
say?
do not. I don't like race cars on access ports. I've never liked race cars on access
Yeah,
ports. This is
for
I'm
sure.
a guy that goes racing a lot, and I
Yeah,
support a lot of Subarus out racing. And
yeah,
when the car has an access port, for example, there was a GC with a bug eye swap in it at the
yeah,
last race I was at that was misfiring like crazy. It turns out in a jump time, but it was harder to diagnose because the car
yeah.
was on access port, and but not because I couldn't look at the trigger patterns in the
Right.
ECU like it could with the cheapest standalone you can find on the
Sure.
market.
Yeah,
So
no, and
I have
for
never liked
sure. For
access port
sure.
for those reasons.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, there's a level of diagnostic capability that exists in a standalone. I can't deny that. Um, there's a different level of implementation cost support that
Yeah.
comes with that is not as widespread user friendly. That would be the difference. Now, standalones are bridging that gap these days, without a doubt. I mean,
Yeah.
the especially in the Subaru world, because most of the standalone companies. I mean, I talked to AEM a decade ago looking to say, can we make some jumper harnesses for Subarus? And I was like, why?
Mm,
But that dynamic has completely shifted
yeah.
to where the standalone aspect in Subaru land is now there's way more development because there's in a market now. It's just Cobb had completely crushed it for so
Well,
long. There
yeah.
wasn't an opening for these standalone companies, and now there is, and now you see support and development come along.
But there's a caveat here, I think, that we as enthusiasts have to be at least aware of, which is like part of what the difference is I think what we've talked about this before. It's like OEM plus,
Yeah,
which is like, okay, I want it to be as close to factory as possible and then maybe just a little bit better, but like something where like the factory would have done it if they could have or whatever, versus like a race car and something that is more like decided from a motorsports functionality standpoint or something along those lines. And and OEM plus, that's really the niche that the access port fills in, and then
yeah,
race cars where the standalone sits.
yeah,
And there was, the access port was kind of able to do a lot of things that we thought that was sufficient, and now the standalones are getting cheaper and better. We're realizing how much there is to gain if you have even, a track car or whatever they put on a standalone from a data logging standpoint, from a diagnosis standpoint.
yeah.
So we're really realizing what the difference is between these two camps, the OEM plus and then kind of like the motorsports. But the kicker is if because I'm going to say you really shouldn't put a standalone in a street car. And there are certain places where you
Yeah,
can do it. But
sure.
the thing is if we as enthusiasts, if that becomes like the standard of everything that we're doing, the hard thing is that kind of paints a target on the standalone manufacturers.
Yeah,
And then it's like if it's kind
yeah.
of like if we ruin that, it's possible that the standalone manufacturers could
They
like
just
run
go
into some
away.
real
Yeah, they
issues.
just go
Yeah.
away because there's an environment by which, yeah, that the EPA or somebody says just no, you just can't do
Yeah.
this anymore. And in regards to that too, like if we're talking about swaps and standalones, if you're going from a non-turbo application to a turbo platform, so you have your 2000 RS and you want to put a oh 06 STI in it, whatever you want, the reality is that standalone is not a jumper, a band-aid, it's still a harness merge at the end of the day.
It doesn't
Um,
make it any easier.
it does exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I want to make sure that that's clear because the reality is, a lot of people when they get and we see it a lot, is that people are like, oh, if I do a standalone, then I can treat it sort of independently on my swap than everything else. The reality is you could, but I think you're wasting resources by doing so because if you take the basic setup of a standalone and let's say you're not getting overly complicated with certain things. So power into it, radiator fans, fuel pump, those kind of basic inputs, outputs, those all should just run through the factory harness anyway. There's no value unless you're trying to run some sort of fancy PWM control, which then if you got a Haltech like Nexus and you can do some of that, then maybe. But if it were me, I'd be looking at radiator fans and going, that should just be on off and I can control when. Fuel pumps could be depending on what I want.
Mhm.
But I would save those high end controllable outputs for fun things, not
Mhm.
So,
OEM related things. So I would treat it
yeah.
like when we did standalones for a bit, because we did six cylinder stuff, we would build an ECU to engine harness for the six cylinder and then merge it in like we would any other swap.
Mhm.
And I still think that's if you're going standalone and you're doing that and you don't want to do it to an OEM plug and a jumper, totally get that. That you're far better off treating it as though it were a merge, because you can reuse so many pieces of the factory harness that save you a bunch of time and diagnosis and all the other stuff.
The reality is when you're doing a swap, the thing that's going to determine whether or not you're doing a standalone is Like it doesn't matter what the destination car is. It could be a 2000 RS, it could be a 2020 STI. If
Yeah.
you're making 900 wheel horsepower and you have electronic wastegates and a
Yeah.
massive turbo on top of a flat six motor and everything like that, you're not getting away with factory ECU and wiring harness. You're gonna need to start putting those fancy electronics in there. And then yeah, you're right. At the same time, you're probably merging it. I mean, I've in the last 6 months, I've put a lot of standalone ECUs in a lot of cars.
I bet.
And
I bet.
yeah, yeah, and it's wild how yeah, you're right. It's exactly like a merge. And then in that case, again, you're just looking at what's the destination platform. Is it a 90s era car? Is it a 2000s era car? Is there a
Right.
other CAN bus modules
Yeah.
and what am I going to do with those? There's cars out there that I've looked at that you still have to run the factory ECU as a piggyback because the HVAC system is pre-CAN bus, but it's LIN, but stuff like that, right? All weird data networks going on inside the car, and
Yeah.
you can't really, there's only so much you can do with the most popular standalone platforms.
Yeah, and most of them, and it's been fun to see them, build their CAN protocol database so that more and more of the factory features are working. Haltech's doing it, Mtron, Link, they're all doing it. And that's,
Yeah.
from an outside perspective, so we really don't mess with it because if we're talking race car and OEM plus, as John noted, we're in the OEM plus category all day long, and that's our wheelhouse. We're really good there. So watching it, from the outside and getting our feel for what's going on, it's fun to see it and seeing that how fast that's moving too. Like that, the
Yeah.
standalone progress in the last 2 years has just been like lightning compared to what it was the previous 8 or 10.
Well, and maybe this is a good segue because some of that is just the functionality in the standalone box itself, but
Yeah.
some of it actually is related to the CAN bus. And I think, Brian, like what you're starting to look towards is actually related to the CAN bus. So it's like your worst enemy is now becoming your best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
One of the interesting things about the developments of standalones in the past few years is that they're way more motorsport focused than
Yeah.
they used to be. Just go look at Link and Formula Drift. Look at how Haltech has developed these really sophisticated PDM ECU combinations,
Yeah.
which make it very possible to build to build a race car with really simple electronics, one box, one
Yeah.
wire for everything, which is awesome. Especially because again, when you're talking about okay, you're building a rally car out of a '98 Impreza, the factory wiring in that car is extremely old and crusty, and there's no
Yeah.
way around it.
There's no way around it. And yeah, because it also depends on which parts we care about, right? Because our oldest, crustiest parts are related to the engine components that we're going to replace anyway. So a lot of
yeah,
times we ran into people that are like, well, so one of the sort of caveats as we wound down the merges over the last few years is that we require the project harness that we will continue to sell, by the way,
Mm.
as a base platform to do
Yeah.
2 liter swap or drive-by-wire
So
04.
you're talking about the engine harness specifically.
Yeah, from the ECU out to the engine. And then we've done some work to like make it easier. It's still very DIY. It's not going to come with instructions, but it is a good starting point. One of the things we found is that people were like, well, why do I have to buy this when I have this '04 STI complete bulkhead harness sitting here that you guys can strip down? And the reason for that is, yes, the rest of the '04 STI harness and your 2000 RS bulkhead harness are both very old. I'm not
mm,
arguing that. But the part that we care about and is going to retain is the part that was under the dash. And that, generally speaking, is in pretty good shape. It's not exposed to the elements like the parts that are important, the engine and ECU components.
yeah,
So we replace those with brand new parts because we just started running into a point where like we get an '05 STI bulkhead harness and we strip it down and be like, I don't feel good about putting this in somebody's car and having it work properly.
yeah,
So, like I said, we'll keep those intact, but to the point, that's the part that's getting replaced. And
hmm
that's even if you're going to build like a blended race car or sort of DIY, whatever thing it is, and you're like, I still need some headlights, taillights, and turn signals. You could treat the ECU engine effectively independent, tie in a couple things to the body harness, cut out what you don't need, and still have a mostly functioning car.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways to do that with the availability of these nicer components that are not old.
Yeah.
And one of the so on the flip side, so if you go look at, for example, what Mtron has really deep support for in the Subaru world, they've made it so it's pretty easy to take a BRZ and put a standalone in it and try to do something along the lines of like a spec car build using a standalone. So you have enhanced data logging capabilities and additional engine protection and stuff like that, which but you can retain the factory dash cluster, everything like that. So it lowers the cost of entry in terms of building like a spec-ish build.
Yeah.
One of the more straightforward like track cars that people are putting together these days.
Yeah. We saw it a lot in there was like a time when we were doing more custom stuff, and we would see people come through and go, I want to build a race car harness, and not quite understand the complexities that what you're asking seems simple because you're like, well, I don't need much. But the challenge in there is that I need to know what you need, and you need to know what you need to make that work. So if you're going to take the approach of I'm going to build a harness from scratch, now the caveat to that is like with the simplicity of the PDM and ECU kind of combining into one, it gives you more flexibility to just kind of build off something versus in the past if we're using a standard relay box, that we're building in-house and it's all kind of analog. You kind of got to know what you want ahead of time before you can dig into that, And so we really try to get people to sort of treat their race car as OEM plus. Run a standalone, great. Increased engine protection, diagnostics, all fantastic. But if you need, especially in like the rally car, world, because I need turn signals, I need like legally, I have to run these.
Yeah. Rally cars are really challenging to build in that department because you need so much PDM to run all the functions of a rally car. Yes. And then cool shirts, communications boxes, all these things. Like I have figured out that because of a lot of the rally cars teams that I work with are budget conscious, we end up with a PDM and a fuse box because 2 PDMs is outside the budget.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely ran it that way. We did a little of that too. I'm trying to remember the build. It was so long ago, but yeah, we basically would take all the key engine components, anything high amp, and run it through a standard fuse box, because by the time you split it into a PDM, you were dividing, because like maybe your PDM max was like a 15 amp per circuit. So you had to combine the two, and now you're cutting your 10 circuits into 5.
Yeah.
So we did a few of those where you're like, let's just take anything high amp and run it through a standard relay. That way you have as much customization on the PDM side as you possibly can get.
I will say, I also, as an experiment, when we built one iteration of the Money Ship rally car, it's a 13 WRX or 12 WRX. I can't remember what in any case, it's a heavily CAN bus car that has a lot of stuff in it from the factory. Pulling the wiring harness and modules was like 250 pounds of stuff.
Yeah.
The body module in that car gets really angry if it doesn't see all the other things that it wants to see.
Oh yeah.
We did 2 races where the door open. Was it door open? No, it wasn't the door alarm. It was the seatbelt chime was going off the entire race. Now, mind you can't hear very much when you're in stage.
No, I was gonna say,
but
not too worried, but yeah.
Still. And then we failed scrutineering once because the running lights didn't come on anymore because the lock cylinder wasn't there anymore.
Oh my god!
And in a Subaru, the running lights, at least in these cars, the running lights are effectively CAN bus between the body module and the
oh man,
I could see that. Yeah, I mean, certainly in our CAN bus adventures, and that's kind of where we're heading in a lot of the things that we're working on. We're seeing all of this complexity and trying to take, I think what Jon kind of picked up earlier is like trying to take some of that where it used to be, take all the CAN bus stuff out. We don't want to touch this. This is complex, and going, no. This is a massive amount of data that can be really beneficial for a lot of things, assuming we're not ripping apart half the car, different story, OEM plus versus race car, and saying, how do we bring this data to the user in the most efficient way possible that gets you the most out of it, is not scary, and make something fun and interesting out of it versus being like, don't stay away from me.
So what was the tipping point there? Like what all of a sudden changed your perspective on the CAN bus?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we're shifting toward, which is, is this general direction. So we released, well, pre-orders are right now. It should be shipping next week. Our first sort of foray into electronic boxes. Now, technically, the VSS, the IVSS that we've come out with, which is if you have a newer transmission, a CAN bus transmission, and a non-transmission or non-CAN bus car, you would have in the non-CAN bus car would have gotten vehicle speed from the transmission, like physically driving a gear that went into a sensor, and the sensor would send it out to the car. The newer cars don't do that. Talking about CAN bus would take wheel speed, go into ABS, and then spit it to the rest of the car via CAN bus. So the newer transmissions don't have a speed sensor built into the trans. But good luck finding a transmission older or, '07 or older, especially if you're looking for DCCD equipment. They're not
Yeah.
out there.
You can still buy '07 transmissions, but anything older than that?
Anything older than that, yeah. It's just good luck.
Yeah.
Period.
We can
Good
still
luck.
get those. Thankfully, Subaru is still making the 07 SC
Yeah, you can
transmission.
you get those
Yeah.
brand new if that's what you're after. And by all means, do that. Like
Yeah.
if you can do it, do it. So basically, the control box takes wheel speed, kind of like a CAN bus car, translates it inside, and then outputs it to the car to replicate what is no longer there on your non-CAN bus car, say your '05 WX. And so the other piece that we've integrated with that is app control. So in the past, what existed, you kind of either had to dial it with like a screw, take a guess at it,
Yeah.
things like that were there. And we found that there was a serious pain point because if you want to calibrate it, it was a real challenge to do so. And then B, even just making sure that it was functioning at all, if you were having some sort of problem, was a serious challenge. So what we did is developed an app to go with it so that you can communicate with the control box. You can calibrate it.
Like you're talking about for a phone.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, you'll be able to use your Android or iOS application to communicate with the box, to set it up. And then if let's say you've got, you've got an off-road car, so you got big tires and the speedo's 10 miles an hour off, with your phone's GPS and the calibration tool in the app, the iWire app, you'll be able to set it up so that your speed output on the gauge cluster and what's going to your ECU is accurate.
I have to say, as somebody who has driven my SVX down the highway with one hand on the steering wheel, the other hand on a screwdriver in the box,
Yep, you nailed it.
I'd love to try that out.
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we saw that pain point and wanted to fix it. So that's our first sort of adventure in this, because I think that that's where we can be the most beneficial to the most people. And that's part of if we're talking about a tipping point for sort of this shift, is the release of this. We realized we can help so many more people, more Subaru owners in so many different ways. And I really hate that means that we're not helping this other group, but just the realities of it. And then once they go turbo, then we can help them more. But it is developing products like that. It also means we have more time for things that we've been trying to build. Like we have a bunch of plug and play replacements, upgrade harnesses to add to the product list we already have to help more people out. We get calls on a regular basis. I can't get X harness from Subaru anymore for my engine.
Yeah.
We would love to be able to help fix that. And so we need some bandwidth to do it.
Well, and frankly, like that's like there's people that are doing swaps, but those of us that have cars that are probably 15 years old and older, well, it's like every year more cars get 15 years old and older.
And then Subaru says, see you later.
Yeah, the rate that parts are getting discontinued is becoming a little bit almost concerning, I would
A little
say.
bit. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say so. Yeah, and that's the thing is we see that more. We just want to be able to keep all these cars on the road, and we found that we can do that, and we'll
Yeah.
continue to do that. Not only will do that, but in terms of the new bits, we can tease it a little bit here, but I can't. We're not quite there yet. Is that the first component is vehicle speed sensor replicator, but the second one is DCCD,
Hmm.
because we've seen such a growth in people understanding what it can do and how it can affect the handling of the car and how it behaves. We decided that we really can add something here.
Hmm.
So what will be coming out early next year is a DCCD control box, and it will have a bunch of really cool features that I wish I could talk about right now. I'm being such a
Sure.
tease. I feel so bad. But
Can
that's
you,
yeah. Go ahead.
well, can you say like, so like the fundamental framework that you have is
Yeah.
you've got an app that is on a phone that is
Yep.
able to communicate to a box in the car.
Yes. Yep.
And is this part of that? Are you using that basic framework to branch out into other things you can do once you have that connection?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
So the one thing I can say is that the DCCD controller will have CAN bus communication. So when you're asking sort of about CAN bus, this is something that as sort of a personal dream of my own, and wanting it to come to life, I've been looking at CAN bus integration well over a decade. Thought it would originally come in the form of swaps as a byproduct
Mm,
of complexity you talked about earlier. That didn't really happen. But really, I'm looking at this going, this is a really great opportunity for us to take some of these older cars that do have a lot of um, data and information that we can utilize. What can we do with it?
hmm,
Why would we not bring some of these older cars just like a swap? It's the same idea of saying we're going to go from non-turbo to turbo because it's something we didn't get. The same idea being we have CAN bus equipped cars that are, getting up there in age. Can we bring them up to give them more features that should be available? And so, VSS and DCCD are both, those
yeah.
kinds of things that we want to do.
There's definitely, again, being at races and seeing a lot of people are bringing newer cars. They're bringing GRs, they're bringing VAs.
Yeah.
And the amount of time, like the amount of times I've had this conversation where it's like, oh yeah, the DCCD isn't working, or oh yeah, I just set it to max lock the whole time.
Yeah. And you're going, but wait, there's more to the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like this, and hell, I mean, we were at a race once where some of the control workers told us we were the only late model Subaru that could actually do four-wheel drive launches. I was like,
Mm,
okay, so
Yeah.
definitely,
yeah.
even though that driveline, that platform's been around for a long time, and there's been solutions in the market
Yeah,
at
for
different
sure.
levels of time. I've talked to people who are like, yeah, no, the map DCCD looks really cool, but that looks complicated to wire. Isn't there
Sure.
something easier I can do? Stuff like
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
Well,
And that's, sorry, go
well,
ahead, John.
I was just going to say for the rally community, you're in this like damned if you do, damned if you don't spot with the newer cars because you cannot use ABS in a rally car on dirt.
Right.
You've got to get the ABS to you've got to eliminate that. But as soon
Mhm.
as you do that, then that ticks off all of the VDC and
Yep.
everything else in the CAN bus because you've taken ABS offline.
Yeah.
And so then like how can you defeat ABS but then keep the DCCD function? And
Yeah.
that's been this more problematic juggle, which is basically what you're talking about there, Jeremy. And
yeah,
so a
Yeah.
that's
solution that like keep everything happy on the CAN bus and let you do what you need to do with your rally car. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, we'll get more into that later, but those are things that we are listening to, and really hope that we can solve for people. And true to what we do, which is to take something very scary, which is wiring, and make it as simple as possible. Anything that we do, we want to make sure that, if you're integrating with the VSS controller, IVSS or IDCCD, the controllers, that anybody can do it. We
Mm,
we we really want to make sure, and it's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the product development in the aftermarket. I mean, you guys have been doing this forever too, right? what we got in 2004 and 2005, in terms of parts availability that would go on a car and the amount of customization that was required to get even something relatively simple attached because they hadn't done it on this car, they had done it on that car, is we're the most manufacturers are, if you want to buy a catalog of parts and not even from the same manufacturer, they're probably going to go together pretty well these days.
Hmm.
And so we want to make sure that's how we're integrating with everybody else too. So as with everything that we do, number one priority is it's plug and play. Like that,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
is that is that is our core. That is, even if you go back to where we started with merges, plug and play, make it simple, customer support work. Those things are all things that we care about a lot. And
So,
everything we design is with that in mind first.
okay. So, Brian, I want you to now explain what the CAN bus is, how it works, and how you
Yeah,
think of it now. Because before it was like that is the no man's land that you just have to you cannot touch. You have to keep happy.
sure.
It's the 500-pound gorilla that you just leave it over in the
Yeah.
corner. How do you think of it now? How do you define the CAN bus now? And maybe as part of that, like what some of the capabilities are that run through this that maybe have
Yeah.
have been opened up.
Yeah. So in regards to CAN bus, like like you said, it was this black box of information, and it was really scary because if you touched it, you caused problems.
Hmm.
That's still the case.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with what you do. But the reality is, what the lens that we look at it now is, we live in a world where data is plentiful everywhere else. Why is it not the case here? It's in there. What can we do with it? And so I would say, from a basic standpoint, just in case people are like, what the heck is CAN bus? What are these people talking about? It's just data communication between components of the car. It used to be that for an individual sensor or a signal, there was a single wire, and that would hit a specific node on, let's say, your ECU, and
Hmm.
it would be for vehicle speed. Now it's you're pulling a bunch of data, it gets processed in a control box and then gets spat out to the rest of the car on a communication line. It's just data. And each module picks up that information, sorts through it, and goes, does anything in here I care about? If not, I'm going to just pass it along to the next box. So it's not a one-to-one. Every box is seeing it all the time. And basically all of your data about what your car is doing at this moment is being passed along at all times. Now, most of
Hmm.
those modules are using little fractions of it. We were talking about body modules and seat belts before. Prime example of that, right?
Hmm.
Your seat belt being plugged in actually probably matters to two or three components of your car.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yes, I
Gotta
have
be.
an analog input, but what else cares, right? So it's an easy way to transfer a lot of data around to a lot of different components so they can choose how they want to use it.
Hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
There's, I was going to say there's basically three categories that you can divide CAN bus into.
Yeah,
One is like you're talking about. This is the ABS module is reading the wheel speed sensors and then transmitting the vehicle speed in real time to the over the network. Now the ECU reads that, the gauge cluster reads
yeah,
that, the airbag module probably reads that. There's a bunch of
probably.
modules that care about the vehicle speed, and
Yeah,
instead of having to take out one wire from each
yeah,
plate from the
Oh yeah.
VSS into the boxes. Now it's on the CAN bus and any, yeah. And then, so there's those kind of data packets. There's also the diagnostic data. And
yeah,
this is now, if you go look at aftermarket dashes and gauge clusters, like go look at a Haltech dash, those are designed to plug into the OBD port because the OBD port actually provides a channel for access to that CAN network, right?
mhm,
And there, this is where you get a lot of very standardized data
yeah,
transmission.
for
And this is
sure.
really useful for data loggers. It's really useful for aftermarket dashes. It's useful for race computers and things like that. If
Yeah,
you want to get that, so in your track car, you've got all that data logging and display, and that's pretty standardized across different manufacturers. That's why you can get these products that now plug into so many different cars. And then the third
Hmm.
category, and this is the thing that really trips everybody up, is that when modules in the car come online, when you turn that key and turn it on, all those modules say, "Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here." Da,
Yeah.
da, da. Right.
Yeah.
And this includes things like detecting the key,
Yeah.
detecting all the security components are there. It includes things like the ABS module saying I'm here, and therefore the DCCD module says, okay, now I know I can get wheel speed because the ABS module is going to be there to do it. And then even, when you're talking about swaps, the automatic transmission computer is going to say, hey, I'm here. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't say, hey, I'm here, anything else in the car related to the driveline might freak out and say, shoot, we can't run
Yeah.
because that module is missing. This is where, this is the thing that's tripped up everybody is that, hey, I wanted to do this swap. I, deleted this module because I manual swapped my,
Right.
2009 Outback
Mm,
XT.
Yeah, I'd
And
say Foresters, right? Because you can't get a
yeah.
manual Forester. Prime example.
Yeah.
yeah, you delete that TCU, and suddenly the rest of the car thinks, the whole car is screwed up because this really important module isn't there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and this is same thing with the immobilizer cars. Is that if that I've shot that on cars before. It's like one little piece of that whole security system puzzle isn't there,
None of it
nothing else
works.
Yeah.
function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that too. Like, I mean, Cobb's, probably dealt with most of it and thinks solved it. But, a little sort of nugget is that generally speaking, if you add something to the CAN bus network, so let's say you had some sort of like aftermarket security system or something that happened to tie into the CAN bus network, it creates problems with other components. To
Mm,
the point where sometimes like especially early on, like 15 plus WX, they had all sorts of issues with reflashing those cars out in the wild because there would be
mm,
something sitting on the CAN network that wasn't expected that created this like domino effect of problems.
mm.
So like it is that's why I say it's still touchy and that you got to be careful what you do. But if you can get in there and navigate appropriately, you do have access to all that data. When Jeremy was noting like the VSS, like imagine you had a single wire for everything that is in there, and then you multiply that out by the number of things that would need to do that. Your harness would be 600 pounds because
Yeah.
it's just all conduit, because you'd have to have a connection of manual connection of some kind to everything else. It's just a natural progression of if you want data at the speed that we have to do it for these cars. I mean, you need to take it from a perspective of just like safety, the safety systems
Mm,
that are in these cars these days.
Right.
That you couldn't feasibly do any of that analog. Like it's not even possible. I was listening to the podcast you had with the lady from SEMA.
oh yeah.
Super insightful, and the commentary about the safety systems and that is a potential concern for modifications coming down is like a really eye opener. But it's also this is where it comes from, is that you have to be able to transfer all that information first,
Yeah.
uh, and then you can build eyesight and all these other fancy systems upon it. So it's a it has it's a give and take, right? It can be so valuable if you can utilize it right, but it can also be just an absolute annoyance.
So I'm going to ask a question, Brian, and you
Sure,
can answer it to whatever degree you want.
sure,
So it seems like I think it's safe to say that you're finding some ways to add information to the CAN bus.
sure.
Are you also like uh, I'm guessing that part of the ability to add information to the CAN bus is also the ability to get in there and kind of read the CAN bus or translate the information that's just inherently there in the CAN bus is getting better. Like, do you think you guys have a decent handle on what is there, or is that something where the
Yeah,
knowledge and understanding of what's in the CAN bus is just something that's going to kind of continue to improve
yeah.
through time?
I
So
think I'll try not to give you the politician answer here.
Okay.
The quick and dirty to that is we don't know what we don't know.
Oh,
There's a lot, right? We in the areas that we are confident, we're super confident. But we don't know what the extent of capabilities in general are, and that's also dependent on the car. Because if you sort of break down CAN bus, Jeremy did a great job of describing sort of the different message types in there. There's also, which I know he's fully aware of, different types of CAN bus. So if you look
Oh
at
yeah.
OH14, you've got a high speed network and a low speed network. So your important stuff's on the high speed, your less important's on the low speed. 15 to 21 is all high speed. 22 plus is its own thing. So it is also highly dependent on which car we're talking about, because depending on the car, the amount of data that exists, like you could go back to 2005 for a legacy, that's the first generation of CAN bus. There's not a lot there, but it is still critical to function of the car. Versus you go to a 22 plus WRX, I mean, like it's just massive difference between those. Those aren't even in the same realm.
It's like
Right.
Pong versus a PlayStation.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, and this is, we're not the only ones who look at this, obviously, in just like the motorsport and OEM plus aftermarket world. There's, if you're a mechanic working on a car these days, you're using a diagnostic computer like, an Altel or a Snap-on Varus or something like that. Those things plug into the CAN bus, and those know how to read data from
Oh yeah.
hundreds of different modules across all the dozen different manufacturers.
Yep.
To the point where I can plug my scanner into a modern Subaru and control all sorts of goofy stuff just because those modules all they just not only do they have all the data and commands they send to each other, but those tool manufacturers are also doing the R&D so that they can provide really good tools to their customers.
Yeah, because your base layer, like you noted through like OBD, is standardized, right? It federally mandated. It is standardized. It is a thing that must be done. So that from that standpoint, it's easy. And to the point of these aftermarket tools, the rest of it, that is not. That is specific to model and manufacturer. And so if you want to start digging into, all the rest of the stuff that's going on, that takes a lot of R&D time. And that's why I gave you my politician answer to say yes and no all at the same time.
And it
Because
sounds
I
like
don't want to, because I also don't want to promise anything, right? Like this is an area that I'm extremely excited about, have been for a long time. And like I said, this was the tipping point, but this is only the very beginning of that also. Like there's a lot of sort of the commentary that we saw was a little bit like surprised, thinking that all we did was merges, which is fine. That's the lens you look at. It's totally cool. But the reality is like what we have now already far exceeds that, let alone the things that we're already investing in and are actively, putting out into the world and seeing how it goes. So, like I said, we're just really excited about those things, but also continuing in the wheelhouse that we've done for a long time, which is, really helpful plug and play bits.
Well,
Just simple
and
stuff.
still keeping the cars on the road. So like all the plugs and everything like that the plug and play harnesses to make installs of things easier, that's not changing. Like some of these wiring components that Subaru is discontinuing, you're well aware of that and paying attention to that and filling that need where possible. And then now this is going to be whatever this functionality of this box is, that's going to be the new addition.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, to the point, connectors, we constantly grow our connector inventory all the time. We're always listening, like at people asking for connectors, we go track them down. That we always grow that database pretty much consistently. One of the recent updates that we did on the website, we're pretty close to done, is if you go and look for like a wiring diagram ID. So for every connector on in your car, there's a associated wiring diagram ID. So let's say it's like a AC compressor, it's like F79 or something. So saying the front harness number 79. As we've gone along, we've collected that data and we're adding it to the website all the time. So if you're trying to hunt down something specific, you can search it by that. You can also search it, because it's the same thing we constantly add, is if you are buying, let's say you need a coolant temp sensor connector, but you don't know which one it is. Maybe we have identified it or you're just searching. You can search the Subaru part number for the sensor and find the associated connector. So we're really trying to make sure, coming back to trying to make it as something really scary, which you guys can't see up there, but there's a unicorn above my head. I put it there for a reason. There it is.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a reason that thing's there. Now I gotta get this back and make it not look like absolute garbage. All right, sweet. Um, it was worth
Good.
it. Totally worth it. We keep that in mind, is that this stuff is really scary. And even from the base layer of saying, I just need a replacement connector for my alternator to get my car back on the road. We care a lot about that just as
Mm,
much as we care about this really fun, cool new stuff that we're doing too. And we're constantly improving all of those places. And so we want to be able to really focus on that kind of stuff, because that's where we can have the most impact on the community, because we're very cognizant of the sort of, I don't want to get too lofty here, of some sort of legacy.
mm,
That's not what I mean. It's just the word I picked. But we're really cognizant of the impact we have on the community, and we care a lot about it. And so anything that we can do to make things that seem inaccessible or scary accessible is really what we're trying to do.
yeah.
And so that that leans to something as small as a $10 connector to as expensive as a DCCD controller and all that other stuff in between. So
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so unique about the Subaru community is that like Subarus present their own set of problems, and then there's a lot of weird things that people are doing with them, like turning them into rally cars and wanting to swap an engine that didn't come in the car into the car.
yeah,
Like that doesn't happen with all different brands of cars. Maybe it does, but I don't think it does.
I was gonna say,
Um,
yeah, I always think about that. I'm like, the number of times that we have, that certainly our lens is that we're the conversion people, we
yeah.
understand that. So that we see a lot of that. But I don't think that also within the Subaru world as a whole, no matter what sort of perspective you're coming from, you're probably seeing a fair amount of that. And like I said, I don't know enough about other manufacturers to say that they don't, but I
Yeah.
would be willing to bet that on the scheme of things, we're probably up there in the messing around
Yeah.
of throwing
Yeah.
different parts together from the same manufacturer standpoint.
For sure. And there's some points where, like with Subaru engine swaps and stuff, like there's enough commonality that you can just kind of, in theory, take something out and bolt it into this other thing
Yeah.
because the bolts are more or less the same.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of points where you hit where it's not the same, and you need something to convert, like like a different engine mount or something like that. And that's where you need like either like a company in the community or like a really savvy person in the community to
Yeah.
kind
We
of
see that a lot.
help
Yeah.
facilitate to get all this stuff going.
Yeah.
And like so it's the companies of the community that help us do all these crazy things with these cars. That's what keeps the community what it is and growing and able to do all the crazy stuff that we do.
Yeah, when you guys were talking about the merges last time and like the swaps, and you basically where we found out, oh, we can just take this GC and dump a bunch of GD parts in it, and they pretty much bolt up like 100%, right? There are some little bits here and there, and people have come along to solve the problems mechanically, along the way. But the reality is they really are pretty darn similar. So why
Mhm.
not take advantage of the fun stuff?
Yeah,
uh, to make it better. So yeah, that's the part that can make our lives a bit challenging sometimes, because of the kind of crazy conversioning that happens all the time, for us to kind of keep up with who's got what.
yeah,
When when you're asking for something, and we ask a lot of questions as a byproduct of knowing this. So if you contact us, we're probably going to first just ask you more questions before we give you an answer. But the reason for that is because we know there's more to the story.
yeah,
And a lot of times it's just like, what part came in that's not the part that you expect to be here?
yeah,
And so we gotta find that out to be able to really get you a good answer and then do something about it. So
yeah,
yeah, this is a crazy world we live in for sure.
yeah.
I recall calling you years ago, Brian, because it turns out that the Baja uses a plastic gas tank, but it's wired
Yes.
metal gas
Yeah.
tank. It's the only car that has that.
Yes. Legacy's funky like that too. Early
Yeah, well,
Legacy, like 2000 Legacy, has something. I'm trying to remember if it's I think it uses a
they're all the
different
same
connector.
chassis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird. So yeah, funky business that exists even not modifying it, just in what Subaru decided to do. One of the things we found out early on with our speed density and hybrid MAF harnesses is that although every other model in 2000 by 2008 switches the MAF sensor to the newer type, not Legacy GT.
No.
Not Outback XT. They keep that until 2010. And you're just like,
Hmm.
but for why?
Yeah. Oh
So this
man.
is yeah, this is the intricacies when you get into trying to make it plug and play. That becomes the challenge, right? Because we do our best to find the oddballs, but man, it's we still get people that go, I got this thing and this doesn't seem to match up. And we look at it and go, yeah, this is an oddball. We'll get
Yeah.
it sorted.
Every now and then Subaru, you figure that they must have had like maybe they had, I don't know, 2 years of legacy production of those MAF sensors left on the shelf, and they're like,
Yeah,
well, if we make this switch, what about these?
yeah, you
You know what?
gotta
Just leave in the
figure.
legacy. Well, we're gonna use
Well, yeah,
everything.
like the legacy guys will deal with it. They're incredible.
Yeah.
They're the most dedicated group. It's fantastic, and it is funny that that would be end up being the case, is that group would end up having the oddball, but yet they're also the people that inevitably will solve the problem. Like they
Yeah.
just our legacy customer, legacy Outback, legacy GT Outback C. Like I just have to hand it to them. They are just so dedicated and so on it.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It really
It,
is.
I
it's
have a
it's
lot of legacy platform cars. I've had a lot more of those than Impreza platform cars, and so
Yeah. Oh,
it's a
then you're it.
yeah.
Then you know.
It's a cool car. It's a cool platform that was just that little bit bigger and that little bit nicer than the
Yeah.
Impreza. That just kind of, and they always kind of continued to be that.
Yes.
And yeah, that just kind of spoke to, definitely spoke to a number of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Well, as we're winding down here, Brian, and maybe well, let's see. I don't know. So I'll give you guys the option. Brian, do you want to kind of like postulate? Let's just like not holding you
Okay.
to this or anything, but like knowing that you're able to kind of access Canvas and do things. Maybe a couple like, hey, this might be possible, or should Jeremy and I just kind of like guess of things that might be possible? And you can just go
Oh,
yay or
I
nay.
like the market research here. So I'm
Okay.
gonna zip it and let you guys
Okay.
roll because to the point, a lot of what we're doing, especially right now, is looking at what is plausible before we, get too tied to anything in particular. So yeah, given you guys have a lot of
Okay.
experiences, yeah,
So
let
knowing
it fly.
knowing that you have an app that was on your phone that is now going to be able to connect to the car.
Yeah.
Okay, baseline. What kind of range does the app have? Like how close does the phone have to be to the car to be able to connect?
It's Bluetooth connectivity, so you're working within that scope.
Which is
At least
100
to start.
feet, 50
What's that?
feet, about 100 feet, 50 feet.
You probably be less than that. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, you gotta be reasonable Bluetooth range.
Okay.
So I would, sort of standard 20 feet would probably be
Okay.
reasonable. So you gotta be you gotta work within, I'm essentially in the car
Okay.
or relatively close to
You
it.
have just gotten out of the car or you're sitting in the car.
Yeah. Your
Okay.
we'll call it arms length effectively.
Okay.
We do have in the modules, the processors do have Wi-Fi capability, so we put that in there for potential uh, change to that perspective. But like I
Hmm.
said, I don't
do they
know.
have they don't have Wi-Fi antennas connected though?
No, no,
Oh
yeah.
yes. Okay.
So you're just talking data speed.
Sure.
And probably
So
there's a lot of reasons to keep it that way. I'm guessing like if you're trying to put an antenna on it, then that would bring in potentially a whole lot more shenanigans that you don't want to get into.
I was gonna say one thing, yeah. To your note, like so, via the IVSS, one of the things that you do when you connect to it is you create a device lock code,
Hmm.
because it is broadcasting. Security is super important. IVSS doesn't necessarily talk directly to the vehicle, so it's a little less concerning. Certainly, if you're talking about something that could interface with the car, you got to be extra careful in security. But there's a couple measures we put in even on IVSS of security to make sure that you are the only one
Okay.
that can communicate it. So along with that, like you noted, proximity is also becomes a factor of that, because you don't want somebody,
Yeah.
100 miles away to somehow magically get
Right.
in your PSS box. I don't know why or how, but like I said, we've put
Yeah.
in some security measures in there to ensure that, because we understand that that is a concern for people. Like you're giving us access, and we really respect that. And we don't take it lightly. So we
Okay.
want to make sure that we're protecting everybody with that. And then the other thing to note also while we're here is that IVSS will come pre-calibrated. So if you are just like, I don't want to hook up an app to my phone, but I need this to work, it will.
Oh,
You
okay.
won't be able to calibrate it, but you can get the vehicle speed sensor working on your car again, and then you can readdress whether you want to interface with us
When
like
you
that.
want to.
So we just
Okay.
want to make sure that, if somebody just was like, I don't want another app on my phone, I respect
Okay.
it.
Okay.
So for at least that product, you could just install it.
Okay. See, the first thing that I thought of is like being here in Colorado, you're walking back to the parking lot to find your car, and there's a million Subarus. Could you get your hazards to flash to go, oh, it's that one. It's over here.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing that happens on Canvas.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But you have to be close enough to the car that you're like, oh, there it is, and then now my hazards are
Theoretically,
flashing.
yeah,
But
you'd
yeah,
have a distance limitation of some
yeah,
kind. To be exact, it would depend. But yeah.
yeah. What what about like a track mode? Like I'm gonna go onto the track and you gotta have both of your passenger windows down. So like hit a button and it just like drops both windows.
Plausible.
Or I say, I mean, you don't have a party box for your Model 3 yet, do you, John?
I do not.
Yeah. So in the Tesla world, Brian, are you familiar with this concept?
Probably. I'm not sure the exact. I'm sure where you're going. I don't know the term, but
Sure. But
when you explain it, I'll catch up.
you want to drive a car that's got advanced stability control on track, and the 13WX does not have a track mode.
Sure.
Mm,
You can pull the ABS fuse if you think that's your problem, but what would be really nice is if you could change that, calibrate it, tune
mm,
it a little bit so you can keep using, you use your stock DCCD system, but the ABS just doesn't try to do stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, 100% plausible. Yeah, absolutely. Because the additional challenge there would be reprogramming to some degree, either trying to intercept or reprogram a factory module, which is definitely has its own challenges, but not
mm.
insurmountable. If you can do it with an ECU, why not with ABS? I think I love the idea for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
When you were talking about the getting into in more in depth in these modules, I was curious if you looked at data loggers.
Yeah, I think data loggers is a
Oh,
great area to
yeah.
be able to do something. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
So,
it's just the yeah, it would once again it comes to what can you see, and then how can you sort of parse it, because like we talked about, we live in a world with endless data. That really isn't the concern, I don't think. Even in cars, right? You have access, assuming you can get in. You have
mm,
access to G sensors and steering angle sensors and brake pressure. I mean, it's all in there, depending on the model. The question is, what do you do with it? Like that.
mm,
That's the
I'll,
real. How do you make it? How do you make it user friendly?
I'll
Right?
say this. I've recently messed so I was telling you, I'm putting standalones in cars. We've got 30, 40-year-old Toyotas that have more data on the dashboard than a brand new Subaru.
Yeah.
mm.
Like
Yeah.
look at an old Mark III Supra. It has a turbo temp light on the dash.
Great. And you're going, wait, yeah,
Wow.
yes, there are so many levels of data that exist, but why don't I see it?
Right. You know what I would love that I guess I've been lazy because I could do this, but I haven't done it. I would love to be able to know, well, I've been beating on my WRX for the last 40 minutes. I wonder just how smoking hot my intercooler is right now.
Wouldn't
You
that
know,
be great?
wouldn't
Yeah.
it be great to know that if I do one more pull, I'm going to blow the motor?
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Completely heat soaked it. Got nothing left.
Yeah, exactly.
but maybe just to that end, like some way to have some kind of an interface with the box. So like there's like a temperature pressure sensor that you want to add somewhere. You could then wire to the box so that the box puts it on the canvas. And I want to say that the BRZ guys are doing something to that effect. That's how
They're
Uh,
they're
doing that.
that's how they've
I was
been.
gonna say, yeah, Jeremy might know this, maybe more than I do. My initial thought is, I mean, Cobb's doing it with Flex Fuel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's coming in on the CAN network. Ecutech does something similar. They're obviously same ownership group. So they're sharing, and I'm sure outside of Subaru platform, that's gotta exist.
Yeah, because the BRZ guys that were figuring out the oil starvation or oil pressure issue in right-hand corners, they were somehow sending the pressure data through the CAN bus to I think an AIM Solo 2 is what they
Sure.
were
Yeah, you're
using.
using it as conduit as long as you
Mhm.
send a packet that doesn't, interfere with something else, kind of what we're talking about, where you got to be really careful about how you do that because you might inadvertently trigger
Yeah,
something else to do,
yeah.
to get upset generally. Totally plausible. Yeah.
Well, being able to to select some number of parameters with the app to data log. So like you have the box plugged in, and I am taking into the track because now like they have like some of them have oil level sensors, oil temperature from the
Yeah.
factory. Like there's more. Subaru's finally giving us a little bit more data in the ECU. So if you
Right.
could pick a couple of critical things you can actually just that are already there that you don't have to add
Sure.
to be able to log those, that would be pretty
Yeah.
cool. And to just
Uh,
see it on your phone too, so you come
Yeah,
off track and
I'll
like,
give you I'll give you one nugget in regards to DCCD sitting on that. Part of it will be a main dash screen on your phone
hmm,
that you will be able to pick from some level of parameters to read out. I don't know it won't I can't say exactly how that will what you'll be able to do with that other than to say we will have access to that and will allow the user to see it to some degree.
I've
Okay.
got one for you.
Yeah,
If you could figure out how to identify from said data that the DCCD is failing,
sure.
here's a lot of cars.
You're talking about the center diff itself.
Yes, I'm talking
Okay.
mechanically speaking. There's a lot of cars out there, like I mean, this especially the newer ones, the eight to 14 cars.
Yeah, they only
See,
have like three
there's a
clutch
lot.
packs in there.
Exactly,
Whatever
yeah,
it is.
yeah. Tissue paper. There's a lot of cars out there where you're driving around it, people are driving those around, and I don't know, you go to the dyno or something like that, and you find out, oh, I've got no torque at the rear because the DCCD is slipping.
Yeah, for sure. I will put it in my bucket, in my market research bucket.
Yeah,
I can't say anything else other than
okay,
it's a valid concern for sure. And to the point, like we've sold DCC controllers in the past, and one of the challenges we have from a troubleshooting tech support standpoint is I installed it. It doesn't seem to be doing something, or my car's clunking, or whatever sort of
yeah,
mechanical thing. And the challenge for us has always been like effectively how do we potentially diagnose your center diff problem.
right,
So it is definitely on our radar in terms of that. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Your center diff, it's never worked before, but it is now. Or
Yeah.
yeah, it turns out
Well,
leaving it manual and full lock for 6 years, that was not good.
yeah,
That
or
did
full
horrible
open
things.
and never having a controller. Both, you're slipping.
Yeah,
Clutch packs are
one
slipping that entire time, especially as you apply more torque, especially
yeah,
as you increase the horsepower. They were not built to do that.
yep,
You want them to lock up when you're on the throttle. So when you don't, that does potentially bring in wear and tear.
yeah,
So especially if, I've had customers definitely in the past have been like, yeah, I've had this installed in my car for 5 years. I'm finally hooking up a DCCD controller. And then they hook it up and I'm like, and they say, well, now it's doing this weird thing it never did before. I'm like, well, that's because you didn't have it hooked up, and either you bought it that way and you don't know,
yeah,
or over the 5 years you've owned it, there's a mechanical problem that has developed that you can't tell until you try to apply lock. So
yeah,
it's very difficult to see.
yeah. Boy, yeah. If you could get like a DCCD health
Health
readout
checker.
somehow, I don't know how feasible that might be, but yeah, that would be interesting.
I'll yeah, I will. I'll
uh,
say we've been thinking about things like that. I don't know what the potential solutions are, but yeah, I mean, those certainly uh,
I have
great to hear.
Yeah.
I have some smoked DCCDs. If
Oh yeah, if you have sitting center diffs, please send them to me.
yeah,
Uh,
Center
yeah,
diff
yeah,
paperweights.
certainly. Yeah, I think part of our adventure on this thing is also um, we yes, we're building an electronic box, but it ties to a mechanical part. So we
yeah,
really do want to have a better sense as we go of what its capabilities are, so that we can, add as much as we can to it. So knowing what it takes to break one is also extremely important.
Sure. Yeah. And if you can find one that's broken so you don't have to actually break one, because it turns out
Yeah.
those DCCDs, they're not cheap.
No, no. Luckily, you can get I don't know. You may know. I know for a while people used to just buy the whole thing, but I think now it's you just buy the clutch packs and you rebuild it for the
Rebuild
most
kits
part.
are almost as expensive as a DCCD.
If you can get it. I think that's the challenge, right? I don't know that. I've
Yeah.
in previous experiences heard that people were struggling to find a complete assembly replacement.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, you can still get them for the O7s,
Yeah.
which are compatible with the O4 to with the all the GD boxes. Yeah, but no, it's a thing.
Yeah.
We've got access to a handful of rebuild kits, but I would not say that it's complete. It's mostly just like the clutch discs and the friction
Just
discs.
the discs. Yeah, it's just the
Yeah.
discs. Yeah, when years
I,
ago now, with Bucky's bucket, he had that, and
Mm.
I think Lance, when he came and helped us on that one, I think he just replaced the clutch packs on that, and it's been good since then. But that was the challenge we ran into even then. So
Yeah.
I'm sure, like I said,
It's
I'm
only going
not
to
in
get
that wheelhouse for the mechanical repairs necessarily, but I'm sure we'll get more into it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, brilliant. Well, Brian, thank you so much for making the time sitting down and chat with us. And it's this new chapter is definitely exciting. It is, the closing of an old chapter and it's the beginning of a new one. And it's, I don't know. Yeah, we're gonna have to sit and think, and like guys in the comments, like if you've got anything else you can think of you'd want to control with your phone on your car. I don't think you're gonna be able to drive it, but
No,
but yeah, I don't think there's enough
not
canvas
with
there.
an
no,
electronic power
and
steering.
no.
No,
There
no.
is there's a cottage industry out there of taking cars that don't do self-driving and adding self-driving to them. And there's
Yeah.
even wackier ones is like go get what is it? The Kia Carnival has an open source interface to
Oh
its
my
like
gosh.
self-driving system. So
Oh,
yeah, no. You can if you want, you can
You
download
could get there. You could get there. Yeah.
you
Oh,
can, you can
actually, I
download
want
that
to throw
stuff
this
on
caveat
the
because
internet.
you made me think of it,
Yeah.
is I don't know that it might be a podcast idea for you guys. That is just we're talking about it. Is have you guys seen what's going on with the Fisker Ocean?
Mhm.
no.
So yeah, Jeremy knows. So basically, they went bankrupt,
Yeah.
and the owners, essentially an owners group, has bought it. So
Okay.
effectively, the Fisker owners, own the company. So
Yeah.
it's a really, really cool
Hmm.
experiment, shall we say?
And
Uh,
and and they're running and the Fiskers, of course, are a weird mishmash of GM parts and all sorts of
yeah,
weird stuff that came off the shelf combined with,
yeah,
lots of really custom one-off stuff. It's kind of like the DeLorean scene, except like,
yeah.
50 years later.
Except electric. Yeah.
Yeah, it is just an interesting because being in the car world, I think that idea of you know customer ownership of the brand is an interesting. We'll see
That
how it
is
plays out.
interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm
Yeah, dig
hoping.
into it. Dig into it. 'Cause like I said, I think it's just
Yeah.
fascinating in its own right. Even though it's not combustion powered, it's electric. But I think the general idea is extremely interesting for a car manufacturer.
I can tie this back. I mean, do you guys have a access to a VB yet, Brian?
Yeah.
So have you have access to an automatic VB yet?
Actually, if I really wanted one, we could grab Bucky's.
Okay.
We just talked about this last episode that released, I think, today.
Yeah.
I put 600 miles on a VB auto while I was in SoCal the other day. Did some
Okay.
canyon runs, did a bunch of in town and out off-road driving.
Yeah.
It's great. It's a great car.
Really?
I want
That's
to buy one.
awesome.
I want to buy one now, and you could tell it's super electronic for a Subaru,
Yeah.
it has eyesight, it has driver assist features that will turn the steering wheel to follow
Yeah.
the lines on the highway, and the SI drive in it really changes the way the transmission operates to the point where there's
Um,
something, the transmission in that car being mechanically is a CVT, but the computer that's connected to it is way more sophisticated than anything else Subaru's done so far.
cool.
So there's something to look at there,
Yeah.
That's true. Like to change the way that if you have more control over the way that the transmission behaves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is the CVTs are a little bit of their own black box.
Yes, yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah. And certainly the depending on, the model and generation of CVT, you may not want to get too deep there, but
They're
the
all
newer ones,
the whack
what's that?
mechanically they're identical. Oh, they're
Really?
almost
Oh, okay. Yeah.
there's two models. There's the little one, which is the Impreza, and there's the
Okay.
big one, which is in the Outback, the Ascent, and also the WRX. Now,
Uh,
the new WRX. Basically, mechanically speaking,
same.
that's all it really exists.
Yeah.
And they're all relatively and mechanically speaking, they're really simple. You take them apart, there's like five
Yeah.
parts in them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting idea. Maybe there's some help that we can provide for the CVT guys instead of them just wanting to rip it out and put a manual in it. Because as we talked about earlier, the CAN bus complexities of that are extreme.
If you can
right.
get it, if you happen to know somebody who's got an auto, like an auto 2022 or newer, take it for a rip, put it
Okay.
in split sharp, put it through its paces, go find a canyon and run it. It is, yeah, it's different.
And
Okay. Yeah.
I think it would have to be a VBWX because I think that's the only one that they've really tinkered with the CVT in this way because that's the one that they call the Subaru Performance
That's
Transmission.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've driven the Ascent. The Ascent does not drive like that. The Ascent
yeah,
drives like all the other CVT cars.
yeah. The
The
Outback Wilderness, ho
yeah,
hum. Yeah,
the VB drives like it has a DSG under the hood.
Okay. I mean, that's
Ooh,
we're definitely looking out there, but yeah, I love the idea. I'm glad you put it on my radar because yeah, it's an
I'm not.
interesting. These are
Yeah.
like clearly, as you guys know, known me, these are the things that keep me entertained. So
Well, and I'm not saying that this is a great idea, but then what just dawned on me is like, well, even if you don't change the WRX, if you could then use the box to make an Ascent or an Outback Wilderness or something like that that has the exact same
right,
transmission,
right, you just make it
have that
behave.
mode or drive with that mode. Again, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that this is a good idea, but 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 it could be interesting.
Well, if it's a good idea, it's mine. If it's a bad idea, it's yours.
Perfect. Perfect. I can take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So our goal here is to make John, shut up about putting a STI 6-speed in the Ascent because the CVT and it's just that good.
All
Oh,
right. Yeah, I love this idea. I love
okay.
Get this
Okay.
done.
All right. All right.
we got it.
Oh man. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry,
and with
Stu gets
that,
one
on
now.
that bombshell, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. Thanks for Brian for everything that you and iWire have done for us, and I cannot wait to
Oh,
see what you continue to do. And Jeremy, thanks for joining us and helping us have this chat.
Yeah.
So
Nice
until
to
next
finally.
time,
yeah, we
yeah,
appreciate it over here, and once again, thank you to everybody who's supported us through all of this. Like it really, it means a lot to us. So thank you guys.
that's awesome. Well, thanks again, and until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning.